The year is 2016. The Broncos had just capped off an all-time defensive campaign with a commanding Super Bowl 50 win over the Panthers. But Peyton Manning had retired and Brock Osweiler had departed for the Texans in free agency. That left Denver choosing between Mark Sanchez, Trevor Siemian, and rookie Paxton Lynch at QB. So could an elite defense really carry a team with a liability under center for the second year in a row? As for Carolina, expectations were enormous coming off a 15-1 season in which they steamrolled the NFC and looked like the conference's next long-term powerhouse. Even though his reputation was tarnished by not diving for his fumble in the Super Bowl, Cam Newton had just accounted for 45 total touchdowns in one of the greatest MVP seasons of the century, and Luke Kuechly was still leading their fast defense. Even though Josh Norman left for the Redskins, some thought the Panthers could be even better in 2016. Elsewhere in the NFC South, Drew Brees was trying to overcome a historically bad defense, Tampa believed Year 2 Jameis Winston would bring a leap forward, and Atlanta was itching to rediscover their early 2015 success without the massive slump in the second half of the season. But Seattle was not to be overlooked. The Legion of Boom was still intact, and Russell Wilson was just entering his prime. Pete Carroll's team had reached 2 Super Bowls in 3 years after all. But Marshawn Lynch's retirement and a poor offensive line gave reason for caution. Arizona was also viewed as a serious NFC player. Carson Palmer was the MVP runner-up in 2015, and with Larry Fitzgerald aging gracefully and David Johnson emerging as a dual-threat superstar, the Cardinals had the talent to finish what they couldn't in January. And in the AFC, New England faced rare uncertainty. Tom Brady's 4-game Deflategate suspension forced the Patriots to open the year with Jimmy Garoppolo and rookie Jacoby Brissett. Brady was 39 years old, and there was legitimate speculation about both his and the Patriots' demise. Pittsburgh believed their championship window was wide open though. The Killer Bees of Ben Roethlisberger, Le'Veon Bell, and Antonio Brown formed the league's most explosive offensive trio. Bell's suspension to begin the year complicated things, but the Steelers' championship ceiling was obvious. And the Bengals were planning to prove that their playoff collapse against Pittsburgh would not curse them. But the AFC West looked like the league's most competitive division. Kansas City had won 11 straight before their divisional round exit. Derek Carr was morphing into a legitimate franchise QB in Oakland, throwing to a young Amari Cooper, and Khalil Mack had just been named a first-team All-Pro at 2 different positions. The Raiders hadn't been relevant since getting their doors blown off in Super Bowl 37. Now, they were a playoff-caliber roster. Houston, though, made one of the biggest offseason gambles by signing Brock Osweiler to a $72 million deal. With J.J. Watt having taken home Defensive Player of the Year in 3 of the past 4 seasons, and DeAndre Hopkins at the peak of his powers, the Texans believed competent quarterback play was all they needed. Whether Osweiler qualified as that was another matter. And standing in Houston's way was Andrew Luck, who had missed the second half of 2015 with injury, but he was seemingly healthy again, still just 27 years old, and viewed as the AFC's long-term successor to Tom Brady. In the NFC North, the Packers were coming off a frustrating season in which they finished second in the division to the Vikings, who had a dominant defense and rushing champion Adrian Peterson. But Teddy Bridgewater suffered a catastrophic knee injury in late August, so the Vikings traded a first-round pick to the Eagles for Sam Bradford days before the season. And much to their delight, the Lions would be without the recently retired Calvin Johnson. And the NFC East was up for grabs. The Redskins were coming off a 9-7 first-place finish in Kirk Cousins' breakout season. But the Giants hired Ben McAdoo as head coach and invested heavily in their defense to support Eli and OBJ. Philly, though, handed the reins to rookie Carson Wentz after trading Sam Bradford, prioritizing their long-term future. But the Cowboys' entire world changed during the preseason with a Tony Romo back injury, forcing them to turn to rookie 4th-round pick Dak Prescott. Paired with their 4th overall pick Ezekiel Elliott, Dallas suddenly had one of the youngest offensive cores in football. Fortunately, the offensive line, featuring Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, and Travis Frederick, was a rising tide that could raise all ships. So the goal was to survive until Romo returned, but what followed would alter the franchise forever. And for the first time in over 2 decades, the NFL was back in Los Angeles. The Rams relocated from St. Louis and acquired the 1st overall pick from Tennessee to draft Cal quarterback Jared Goff, initiating a full franchise reset in a massive market. With Jeff Fisher still at the helm, the hope was that a new city and a new QB would give the Rams long-term relevance once and for all. And the Colin Kaepernick national anthem protests were underway, creating a nationwide debate and drama for new head coach Chip Kelly. This video is sponsored by Fume. And to be blunt, when Fume first reached out, I took one look and thought, that looks like a vape, no chance, not putting that on my channel. But I quickly realized Fume is not a vape. It's a flavored air device designed to help people move away from vaping and smoking by replacing the habit itself. There's no nicotine, no vapor, and no batteries. And it's made of real, respectable materials like wood and metal that give you something to reach for when the cravings show up. Because cravings aren't just about nicotine, it's also about the physical habit. That can often be the hardest part to break. Fume helps you upgrade that loop instead of feeding it. Fume's flavors are lighter than vaping, more like flavored water compared to soda. Crisp mint is the boldest option, while raspberry, for example, is tangy and slightly sweet. And right now, when you grab a Journey Pack, you'll get a free Fume topper when you use my code Kai the Beach Kid. The topper adds a soft, chewable mouthpiece for when cravings hit. So head to tryfume.com, that's tryfum.com, or scan the QR code and use code Kai the Beach Kid to get your free Fume topper with your Journey Pack. The 2016 season opened just like the last one ended, Denver hosting Carolina in a Super Bowl 50 rematch. And once again, it was the Broncos defense dictating terms in a 21-20 win, the beginning of a 4-0 start with Trevor Siemian. The spotlight then turned to Jimmy Garoppolo, who went into Arizona on Sunday night and beat the Cardinals before injuring his shoulder the next week. Jacoby Brissett stepped in to beat Houston, and the Patriots started 3-1 with Brady's return on the horizon. And for the Vikings, the Sam Bradford trade looked brilliant. In the very first regular season game at US Bank Stadium, Minnesota beat Green Bay 17-14. The defense, led by Everson Griffin and Harrison Smith, overwhelmed opponents all month. So against the odds, they opened 4-0. But Adrian Peterson was set to miss most of the season with a torn meniscus. Similarly, with Dak Prescott managing games and Ezekiel Elliott finding rhythm behind the O-line, the Cowboys were 3-1. The idea of just handing the job back to Tony Romo was no longer a given. And after falling to Tampa in Week 1, the Falcons scored 35, 45, and then 48 points against the Panthers when Matt Ryan threw for 500 yards and Julio Jones had 300 receiving. They were off to a red-hot start for the second year in a row. But a couple weeks after their opening loss in Denver, the Panthers lost to Minnesota as Cam was sacked 8 times and then let up 48 to Atlanta, dropping to 1-3. However, Oakland was putting the AFC on notice. Derek Carr got the W over Drew Brees in a high-scoring Week 1 and ended the month by throwing 4 touchdowns against Baltimore. They were 3-1, and Khalil Mack hadn't even gotten warmed up. Also 3-1 were the Seahawks, despite the fact that Russell Wilson already had a bum ankle and a bad knee. The one blemish being a gross 9-3 Week 2 loss to the Rams, who were somehow also 3-1, even though Jared Goff remained glued to the bench. The Case Keenum-led offense wasn't scoring much, but the Rams were hanging around in unsexy fashion. However, Pittsburgh's offense was just as advertised. Antonio Brown opened the season with 126 yards and 2 scores against the Redskins, and in Le'Veon Bell's Week 4 return from suspension, Big Ben threw 5 touchdowns against the Chiefs, AB hauled in a pair, and the Steelers closed the month also 3-1. Their one loss coming to the overachieving Eagles. Carson Wentz shredded Cleveland, beat Chicago on Monday night, and then blew out Pittsburgh 34-3 to reach 3-0 heading into their Week 4 bye. Tom Brady returned in a Week 5 win against Cleveland where he threw for 406 yards. A week later, he tossed 3 touchdowns against the Bengals, then went into Pittsburgh against a shorthanded Steelers team and won 27-16 to remind everyone who still ran the AFC. The Patriots were 7-1. But while New England was reclaiming control of their conference, the Vikings were losing theirs. Minnesota pushed to 5-0 after beating Houston, but lost in Philly after Bradford was sacked 6 times. A Monday night loss in Chicago followed, and while the defense remained elite, Bradford couldn't stay protected long enough for it to matter. So the Vikings went from 5-0 to eventually 5-4 if we look ahead to November. In contrast, the Falcons kept pouring it on, scoring at least 30 points against the Chargers, Packers, and Bucks. But the wins kept stacking in Dallas too. Ezekiel Elliott ran for 134 against the Bengals, then 157 against Green Bay, and after an OT win over the Eagles, the Cowboys were 6-1. The Steelers, however, hit rough waters. Big Ben tore his meniscus in a 30-15 loss to Miami, so Landry Jones started against the Patriots, but luckily he would only miss one game. However, Miami was discovering an identity. Running back Ajayi exploded in October. After barely touching the ball early in the season, he rushed for 204 yards against Pittsburgh, then topped it with 214 against Buffalo in their very next game. After a 1-4 start, Miami was creeping toward 500 heading into their bye. But fortunately for the Steelers, no one had a worse month than Baltimore. After a 3-0 September, the Ravens lost every October contest. And after being blown out by Pittsburgh to end September, the Chiefs bounced back with wins over the Raiders, Saints, and Colts, who were a roller coaster. They blew a 14-point lead to Houston in Week 6 in Brock Osweiler's best game of the year, then torched the Titans for 34 points as Luck threw for over 350 yards. With a high-scoring offense but terrible defense, the Colts were 3-5, 2 games behind Houston in the AFC South, who were without J.J. Watt for the rest of the season due to back surgery. But sitting atop the AFC West was Oakland. The Raiders beat the Chargers, Jags, and the Bucks in overtime as Derek Carr threw for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns to finish the month 5-2 and overtake the Broncos. But after giving up 48 to Atlanta, the Panthers lost to Tampa Bay and New Orleans. The reigning NFC champs were 2-5 after a Week 8 win over the Cardinals, who were spiraling out of control themselves. They tied Seattle 6-6 in Week 7 before dropping to 3-4-1 with their loss to Carolina. And the Rams' 3-1 start proved to be fool's gold. Case Keenum threw 4 interceptions in London against the Giants, as Jared Goff still waited on the sideline heading into their bye week at 3-4. And after the Eagles' 3-0 start, Carson Wentz hit a rookie rough patch. Losses to the Lions, Redskins, and Cowboys brought Philadelphia back to earth at 4-3. In Week 9, Dak Prescott went toe-to-toe with Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh and walked out with a 35-30 win after a 32-yard game-winning Elliott touchdown run. On Thanksgiving, they endured 450 yards and 3 touchdowns from Kirk Cousins to beat the Redskins before picking up their 11th straight win against Minnesota, in control of the NFC at 11-1. The Vikings, though, fell to 6-6 after their Cowboys loss. But New England was 10-2. After losing their epic Week 10 Super Bowl rematch to Seattle after a failed 4th and goal, they rattled off wins against the Niners, Jets, and Rams. At the same time, Atlanta's offense was reaching a different level. Matt Ryan threw 4 touchdowns in a 43-point showing against Tampa Bay, and 2 weeks later, another 38 against Arizona. By month's end, the Falcons were 7-4, averaging well over 30 points per game, and Ryan was at the forefront of the MVP race. But Drew Brees lit up November too, throwing 12 touchdowns this month, 4 of which came in a 49-21 win over the Rams. And rookie Michael Thomas emerged as a reliable chain mover for the 5-6 Saints. In the AFC West, Oakland still paced the division. After an electric come-from-behind win over the Texans in Mexico City, the Raiders scored 35 and 38 points against Carolina and Buffalo to reach 10-2. In contention for the AFC's top seed, 2 games ahead of Denver and 1 game ahead of Kansas City, who were in the midst of what would end up being 8 wins in 9 games, thanks in no small part to all-pro seasons from Travis Kelce and rookie return man and overall weapon Tyreek Hill. But Pittsburgh began to find their footing in the second half of the month, including a 28-7 win over Indianapolis on Thanksgiving night. Now tied with Baltimore for first place in the AFC North after their 38-6 win over Miami in Week 13. And with one of the most physical defensive units in the league, the Giants rattled off 4 more wins in November to finish off a 6-game win streak. With 5 interceptions in 4 games, safety Landon Collins was making a run at Defensive Player of the Year. But with fourth quarter comeback after fourth quarter comeback, Detroit entered the playoff picture as well, on a 5-game win streak that included 2 over Minnesota. But after a 40-7 loss at the hands of the Seahawks, the Panthers were out of the playoff picture at 4-8. Jared Goff came off the bench to make his first career start against the Dolphins in a 14-10 loss, where he threw for 134 yards and no touchdowns. And finally, after the Packers fell to 4-6 following a Week 11 loss to the Redskins, Aaron Rodgers delivered the line that would echo through the rest of the season.
I feel like we can run the table.
After the Giants ended the Cowboys' win streak in Week 14, Dallas locked up the NFC's top seed with wins in 2 of their last 3. Jason Garrett was Coach of the Year, Ezekiel Elliott led the league in rushing, and Dak Prescott won Rookie of the Year. Tony Romo appeared in Week 17 against Philly and threw a touchdown on his only drive, as Dallas finished 13-3 while the Giants took a wild card at 11-5 in Odell Beckham Jr.'s last elite season. But Aaron Rodgers made good on his promise. The 4-6 Green Bay beat Philly, Houston, then Seattle in a 38-10 statement before taking down Chicago and Minnesota to set themselves up for a Week 17 matchup with Detroit for the NFC North crown. At Ford Field, Rodgers threw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 31-24 win. The Packers finished 10-6 after running the table, and Jordy Nelson, in his first season back from a torn ACL, was the comeback player of the year with over 1,200 yards and 14 touchdowns. The Lions, however, lost their final 3 games, squeaking into the playoffs at 9-7. But Atlanta closed with authority, scoring at least 33 in each of their last 4 games, including Week 16 when they squished the Panthers into the dirt. En route to both the MVP and Offensive Player of the Year, Matt Ryan finished with 4,900 yards, 38 touchdowns, 7 picks, and a 117 passer rating as the Falcons earned the NFC's number 2 seed. Seattle finished 10-5-1 and claimed the NFC West over the 7-8-1 Cardinals, who disappointed mightily as a whole but at least had David Johnson lead the NFL in scrimmage yards. In the AFC, New England never wavered at all. In Week 14, they won 30-23 in Foxborough. They outscored the Jets and Dolphins 76-17 over the final 2 weeks to finish 14-2 for yet another number 1 seed. But in Adam Gase's first season, the Dolphins won 9 of their final 11 games to end 10-6 and claim the AFC's last wild card. Jay Ajayi logged his 3rd 200-yard rushing performance of the year in their Week 16 overtime win at Buffalo. But 2 weeks prior, Ryan Tannehill suffered a partially torn ACL, forcing Matt Moore into action ahead of their first playoff berth since 2008. And at 12-3, Derek Carr had the Raiders ready to challenge New England before breaking his leg against the Colts in Week 16, all but ending the best Raiders season since 2002. On the bright side, Khalil Mack was the Defensive Player of the Year. But Kansas City took advantage of Oakland's Week 17 loss to Denver, winning the AFC West at 12-4, while the Broncos missed the playoffs at 9-7 because of their inability to produce any sort of offense in December. But the Steelers were on fire. Part of a 7-game win streak to close the year, Le'Veon Bell ran for 236 yards at Buffalo in Week 14, and on Christmas Day, the Steelers beat Baltimore in a division-deciding thriller when Antonio Brown's immaculate extension put them ahead with 10 seconds left. The AFC North went to Pittsburgh at 11-5. And despite bottom-of-the-league quarterback play, Houston won the AFC South at 9-7. The Titans had been right there at 8-6, riding DeMarco Murray's bounce back, and a promising second-year leap from Marcus Mariota until he broke his leg in Week 16. The Colts finished 3rd at 8-8. And in LA, the Rams fired Jeff Fisher after a 4-9 start, ready to usher in a new era. Injuries forced Oakland to start rookie Connor Cook, the first QB to make his first career start in a playoff game. The Texans' defense capitalized with 3 interceptions, while Osweiler managed the decisive 27-14 win. Likewise, the Seahawks' defense held the Lions to just 231 total yards. Thomas Rawls ran for 161 himself, Russell Wilson threw 2 touchdowns, and big plays to Baldwin and Richardson sealed a 26-6 win. But Pittsburgh flipped the script from their regular season loss to Miami. The Steelers scored 3 first-half touchdowns, forced 3 turnovers, and piled up 367 yards. Antonio Brown caught 2 long scores, Le'Veon Bell ran for 167, and the defense harassed Matt Moore all game for a 30-12 victory. And finally, Green Bay avenged past playoff losses by routing the Giants 38-13. After trailing early, Aaron Rodgers changed the game with a late first-half touchdown to Davante Adams and a Hail Mary to Randall Cobb. In fact, 3 of his 4 scores went to Cobb. The Giants' loss was then pinned on the fact that their wide receivers were pictured on a boat a week before the game. After an early Seahawks touchdown, the Falcons took control with a safety, a touchdown right before half, and pristine second-half drives. Matt Ryan threw 3 touchdowns, and Atlanta's defense forced 2 Seattle turnovers to reach their first NFC title game since 2012. Next, New England advanced to their 6th straight AFC championship by beating Houston. Dion Lewis scored 3 times, rushing, receiving, and on a 98-yard return, while the Patriots intercepted Brock Osweiler 3 times in a 34-16 win. Then, in a shootout featuring 400-plus yards of offense from each team, Aaron Rodgers threw for 365 and set up Mason Crosby's game winner with that clutch 36-yard sideline beauty to Jared Cook on 3rd and 20, ending Dak and Zeke's legendary rookie campaign. And lastly, a storm-delayed game became a field goal duel. Pittsburgh moved the ball but never scored a touchdown, riding Chris Boswell's postseason record 6 field goals. KC scored 2 touchdowns, but a failed 2-point in the final minutes proved fatal, and the Steelers left Arrowhead with an 18-16 win. In the Georgia Dome finale, Matt Ryan obliterated Green Bay for 392 yards and accounted for 5 total touchdowns, while Julio Jones dominated with 180 and 2 scores. The Falcons took a 31-0 lead in the beginning of the 3rd quarter, making Aaron Rodgers' 3 second-half touchdowns irrelevant. The Falcons totaled 493 yards and scored on 7 of their first 8 drives in the 44-21 win to reach their first Super Bowl since 1998. And in the AFC Championship, Pittsburgh's elite offensive attack stalled after Le'Veon Bell exited early with a groin injury. Brady threw for 384 and 3 touchdowns, repeatedly exposing the Steelers downfield. Chris Hogan did his best Julio Jones impression, erupting for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns, and Edelman added 118 and a score of his own. After trailing 17-9 at halftime, Big Ben piled up yards but little else, as New England's 19-point second half propelled them to a 36-17 AFC Championship win and their 7th Super Bowl of the Brady-Belichick era. In Super Bowl 51, the first quarter drifted by with punts, though Devonta Freeman flashed early with a 37-yard burst that demonstrated the Falcons' speed advantage. But a clear edge was established in the second quarter. A Patriots drive into Falcons territory ended when Deion Jones stripped LeGarrette Blount and Robert Alford recovered. Matt Ryan immediately made New England pay, feeding Julio Jones before Freeman capped a 71-yard drive with a touchdown. Another quick Falcons drive followed, and in the blink of an eye, it was 14-0. The Patriots threatened, helped out by penalties and catches from Martellus Bennett, but Brady forced a throw that Alford intercepted and returned 82 yards for a touchdown. Now down 21-0, the Patriots finally found some footing as James White ripped off a 28-yard catch and run to set up a field goal that made it 21-3 going into halftime. But the third quarter buried the Patriots even further. Ryan completed chunk gains to Gabriel and Sanu, finishing an 85-yard drive with a touchdown pass to Tevin Coleman. Atlanta led 28-3, virtually guaranteeing victory, but Brady responded with a 13-play touchdown drive, converting a 4th down and even scrambling for 15 yards. However, a missed extra point kept the climb steep at 28-9. An onside kick failed, yet a holding penalty blew up Atlanta's next possession, creating a sliver of hope. Early in the 4th, Brady drove again but settled for a field goal after back-to-back sacks by Grady Jarrett, 28-12. However, the play that really opened the door came on Atlanta's next possession when Dante Hightower blasted through on a blitz to strip sack Matt Ryan, and the Patriots recovered at the Atlanta 25. Brady zipped it to Amendola for the touchdown, and White's 2-point conversion made it 28-20 with under 6 minutes left. Atlanta still had the game in hand, though. Freeman took a short pass 39 yards, and Julio made an iconic sideline catch to the Patriots 22. But a 1-yard loss, a 12-yard sack by Flowers, and a critical holding penalty knocked the Falcons out of field goal range. So after the punt, Brady had the ball at his own 9 with 3:30 left. He completed to Chris Hogan and Malcolm Mitchell before unloading a pass that ricocheted off Alford's leg before Julian Edelman snatched it inches from the turf for one of the most improbable catches in Super Bowl history. Amendola moved the chains again, and White slipped out of the backfield for 2 catches before finding the end zone for the second time on a goal line rush with under a minute left. Brady hit Amendola for 2 to tie it at 28 and force overtime. After all that, the first OT in Super Bowl history could only end one way. Brady picked Atlanta apart with short throws before a pass interference set up goal to go. On second down, White took a pitch and was met by multiple defenders, but pushed the ball across the plane. After trailing by 25, the Patriots completed the largest comeback in Super Bowl history, winning 34-28 and rewriting what the word over means in football as Tom Brady became the undisputed GOAT.